Hi, everyone, and welcome. Wherever you are joining us from, I hope you're safe and well. My name is Marilyn Zahour. I'm the CEO and founder of Cosmic Centers, and we're an organizational and leadership development consultancy. You're joining us as part of the 7th edition of the Cosmic Conference, which we're running over 3 weeks, started March 25th and until April 17th. This year's theme is Grounded and Limitless, leading organizations that survive and thrive. And really, at its heart, it's about how leaders navigate prolonged uncertainty without losing either their footing or their ambition. That's the question we're exploring together across the conference, alongside more than 20 leaders, practitioners, and thinkers through 3 lenses: enduring, adapting, and thriving. And today you're joining us in week 2, Adapt, which is really where things start to move. This is where organizations begin to move past the initial shock. We institutionalize creativity, we deepen relationships, and we build the ability to sense and respond to change as it's happening. Before we dive in, I want to say this is a conversation as much as it is a webinar. Please share your thoughts, your questions, your reflections in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll try to make sure we have time for your questions. And if you've been finding these sessions valuable, one small ask from us is that we're currently running a piece of research on how leaders in the Arab world are navigating uncertainty. The team will drop a link in the chat. It takes about 5 minutes, and it really helps us capture and share these insights more broadly. We really believe that the world has something to learn from us about how to do this well. Now to today's conversation. Our session is titled Containment and Ambition, Delivering Visionary Impact in a Complex World, and I'm very pleased to be joined by a dear friend, Wissam Adib. Thank you so much for being with us, Wissam.
Hi, Marilyn. Thank you so much for having me. This is, I believe, my 3rd year joining the Cosmic Conference, and it's been
exactly what I was going to say.
Yes.
We first met around the Cosmic Conference, and we've been collaborating together since. So
yes.
For those who have not met you in our other conferences, maybe let me take a second to introduce you. Wissam is a leadership and organizational development expert who works with senior leaders, leadership teams, and organizations to unlock hidden potential. He brings over 25 years of experience in organizational transformation and 9 years coaching leaders. Wissam was the head of institutional management at the Executive Council of the Dubai government, where he co-designed the institutional and governance structure of the Dubai government. He then led the transformation of several Dubai government entities. Wissam also spent more than 12 years as an advisor at the UAE Prime Minister's office, where he was responsible for transforming the machinery of federal government. He led transformative programs such as the development of the Agile Government Framework and the Public Sector Innovation Framework. He also oversaw cross-government policy and change programs related to government strategy, structure, and innovation. And as Wissam just said, he is no stranger to the Cosmic Conference. He is a returning speaker and partner. He has co-designed and facilitated many of our sessions over the years, reflecting his ongoing commitment to helping leaders think, connect, and grow differently. He's also currently working on a book on leadership containment, which we will expand on today through the lens of leading through uncertainty and delivering ambitious outcome. To frame this conversation before I hand it over to Wissam, across the GCC before the last 6 weeks, we were already operating in one of the most ambitious contexts globally. We have national agendas in many of the GCC countries, the UAE Vision 2031, Saudi Vision 2030, Oman Vision 2040, which are driving large-scale transformation across sectors, economies, and ways of working. And of course, we can already start to see the results in the UAE, that is home to both Wissam and myself. Non-oil economy now contributes more than 75% of GDP. This is a region that continues to build and move forward at pace. And underlying these ambitious strategies are teams and organizations who have to deliver at speed. Now, at the same time, of course, recent geopolitical tensions have added yet another layer of complexity. Disruptions to trade routes, rising costs, and shifting market signals are increasing pressure across systems and organizations. And in response, many of us instinctively tighten control. We step in more, direct more closely, move more quickly to create clarity. The impact cascades, teams shift into reactive patterns. Thinking might narrow and momentum begins to slow. So the question we're going to explore today is, how do leaders sustain ambition and pressure while also creating the stability that people need in order to move forward? Wissam, you are going to be sharing your perspective for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll take myself out of the conversation for that period, and then I'll come back with my own questions, and I'm sure with a lot of questions from the audience as well. Wissam, over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thanks very much. It's great to be here. You mentioned my experience with UAE government. I started working initially with the executive office of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid back in 2005, and spent the next 20 years at the center of a crazy period in Dubai's history. Anybody who's been here or anybody who's heard stories about that period knows that it was a period of incredible transformation. And so I found myself, when I was working with leaders, coaching leaders through their own ambitious strategies, visions, missions for their organizations, thinking about what made this incredible transformation possible. What's the magic fairy dust kind of that allowed Dubai, the UAE, to do what many countries aspire to do but struggled with. And through my research, through my experience at that work, I arrived at this idea of containment. It's not a new idea. Containment is an idea that's very prevalent in psychology literature, but it's just starting to make its way into leadership literature as well. So Marilyn, if I could ask you to put up those slides, and I have some things prepared that I'd like to walk through, and then maybe we can have a bit of a discussion around it. So if you think back at the period, I found this photo online of what the IFC looked like back in 2005. I used to work out of Emirates Towers, which are the two towers you see in the background there. And this is essentially kind of the other perspective of my view. There were big dreams around what Dubai wanted to achieve at the time. This is Burj Khalifa soon after. Back then it was known as Burj Dubai still, but it was still being constructed. Look at the background. Look at where Dubai was back then. And there was, a lot of things that we take for granted now were still to be determined back then. This was a headline from 2005 that says 3 Gulf countries, Bahrain, Qatar, and Dubai, competing to see who would become the financial center. We know now that Dubai won that competition, but back then it was really still up in the air, and there was a lot of competing happening. It was a period of intense ambition, a period where there were big dreams, but a period of significant also really a kind of anxiety. Are we going to succeed or are we going to fail? Leadership had big dreams for us, and it was up to every person who was part of that team to deliver on those dreams. And so I wanted to bring forward this idea of the kind of challenges that one finds themselves working with when they're delivering on these big visions. And Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid back in 2005 also published his book, Ru'yati, or My Vision for Dubai, where he set forth what he wanted for the city. And if you think about kind of purely from a leadership perspective, the kind of challenges that one faces in their career, in their or leadership life, the Kinevin model provides us with 4 different types of challenges, but 2 that I think are relevant for this conversation. One are complicated challenges, and a second are what are called complex challenges. And very quickly, complicated challenges, for example, something like building an airplane. It's not easy to build an airplane. You have to have a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge in order to build an airplane, but it's largely a predictable challenge. It's one where if you had that expertise, you had a pretty good chance of succeeding. And so with complicated challenges, more expertise helps. The way that you succeed with complicated challenges is with better planning and execution. You have available to you a lot of best practices, other people who have faced similar challenges and succeeded, and the solutions tend to be fixed. On the other hand, whenever you are undertaking a, a plan that includes a very high degree of ambition, you're doing something that has never been done before. Something where everybody says you are going to fail, which was the case really for Dubai back in 2005 and for that entire period. Equally, if you're facing a crisis, which is the situation we find ourselves in at the moment, those types of challenges tend to be unpredictable. As you are solving these challenges, the ground is shifting beneath your feet. As soon as you fix one problem, another one emerges. As soon as you achieve one milestone, the next milestone turns out to be different than what you had anticipated. And so here, and this was our experience also uh, in Dubai government back then, um, expertise only gets you so far because the context matters here. What worked well in another environment may not work well for you. And so the strategy that succeeds in this environment is one that has a high degree of adaptation. Um, as you solve problems, the ground shifts and new problems emerge. And so here, effective leadership requires not that you plan and execute, but that you experiment and learn. How can we do things rapidly rather than immediately at scale, and then quickly learn from those experiments and adapt? And so rather than fixed solutions, you need an environment that is able to adapt to ongoing change. So it's useful to keep kind of those two paradigms in mind throughout this. Um, if you are, undertaking incremental change, it's a complicated challenge. But if you are trying to execute transformative change, you're really much more in the complex world. Okay, so in the complicated world, as a leader, what works really well is better control. If I am trying to build an airplane, I want to make sure that we are building according to spec. We have a high quality control, low tolerance for mistakes. So control works really well here. But if you're dealing with a complex challenge, actually what happens is control tends to create more anxiety. So imagine a situation, I mean, think back to, for all of you listening, think back to when you first learned how to ride a bicycle or learned how to drive a car. If you have someone next to you trying to control the outcome, kind of, screaming, yelling at you, saying, "No, uh, brake or don't drive so fast or avoid that bump over there," uh, that actually increases the level of anxiety rather than reducing it. What you need when you're learning something new, when you're doing something that you've never done before, is containment. You need somebody to provide an environment where if you were to experiment and sometimes hopefully succeed and sometimes fail, that you feel protected and you feel like you're able to get back on your feet and uh, continue. Again, in the driving scenario, learning to drive scenario, having someone next to you who can take over when things get a little bit out of control, who can provide reassurance when you're learning an experiment. So in a complex environment, it turns out that the better leadership skill is containment, not control. And I want to be clear that containment in this context has nothing to do with geopolitical containment, even though we're kind of going through kind of a geopolitical crisis at the moment. But this is very much a leadership skill. We're talking about containment as leadership skill. Okay, so what is containment? Containment is the capacity as a leader to receive anxiety from the system, process this anxiety, and return it in a form that allows productivity to resume. Um, you, we all need to understand that ambition creates anxiety. When you ask people to do things that have never done before, the primary feeling is fear. And that's, as leaders, that's what we need to contend with. And that's what we need to manage so our teams can go back to being productive. Otherwise, teams end up exerting most of their energy trying to manage that fear rather than be productive. So containment is a kind of a process that transforms that anxiety into productivity. Marilyn, this is a slide that we co-designed. Containment is about maintaining the right emotional climate. If we have too little containment, we end up triggering a fear response. We move too much into disequilibrium, and uh, our teams experience a fight or flight response. If we have too much containment, if we calm things down, imagine a scenario where the building is on fire and the leader says, "Oh, there's nothing to worry about. The fire suppression system is going to kick in." Everybody now is no longer doing anything about the fire. And if that fire suppression system does not kick in, then we're in big trouble. So too much containment leads to denial. So the idea behind containment is, how do we achieve kind of that Goldilocks, that middle zone of disequilibrium that allows us to be productive and that allows enough uh, distress that people are motivated to do something about it. This is really, as a leader, what we're trying to manage in this situation. So um, let's talk maybe in a little bit more detail about the different types of containment that are out there. And my research has revealed 4 layers of containment. I'll walk you through them one by one, give a few examples, and then happy later to take questions or to have a discussion around what they look like. These are just illustrative examples. There's a lot more in each layer, and I'll talk more for those who are interested in learning more about this. There's a link at the end for that. But at the very core of containment is the inner container. Each one of us has within us an inner container. Uh, it is our personal ability to hold fear and anxiety. As a leader, when we ask our teams to deliver big uh, outcomes, we first feel that fear within us. We first feel that anxiety within us. I've been in a number of conversations now with leaders who are dealing with the current geopolitical crisis, and they feel first within them the challenge of what they're going through. There are many rituals and practices and skills and tools that we can apply as leaders to build a resilient inner container, a container that can hold more fear and more anxiety without collapsing. One of the big capabilities that are fundamental for leaders is this idea of negative capability. Negative capability is a term coined by the poet John Keats. The way he describes it is, it's the ability to embrace uncertainty, mysteries, and doubts without irritably reaching after fact and reason. And what that means plainly is, when we are faced with risk, uncertainty, when we are faced with crisis or challenge, most of the time, what people tend to do is they tend to reach towards certainty. They want decisions, they want action, they want movement. But sometimes in a complex situation, that's not the right thing to do. Actually, what you want to do as a leader is to slow things down. You want to calm the system. You want to sit with the uncertainty until the deeper solutions begin to emerge. So, one of the things that I encourage all of my clients to do, and I encourage all leaders to do, is to build this negative capability. When you feel that impulse inside of you towards action, ask the question, is action what is required now? Or is it more important to sit with this uncertainty for a little while longer until more interesting truths emerge? So this is one example of building inner capability. There are others, but the first container we build is the container within ourselves. A lot of that has to do with understanding how we function as leaders, understanding how our mind is programmed, understanding how we show up, our light, our shadow. All of these things bring awareness towards our leadership capability. Um, I love what the UAE did in the media briefing. That's not to diminish what other countries have done. It's just that living in the UAE and having been part of the system for so long, I'm more familiar with what's happening here. One of the things we heard Her Excellency Reem Al Hashmi say during the media briefing is that the UAE maintains a measured and restrained approach. They prioritize wisdom and calm. That's an example of negative capability, that in moments of crisis, rather than rushing towards action, we maintain calm. And then we wait to see what the best solution is to go forward. The next layer of containment is relational containment. So the first layer is the container within us. The next container is the container that exists between us and others, whether those others are individuals or whether those others are teams. And here, I'll just find my way to the next slide. Apologies. Here, it's important to think in terms of the authority that we occupy, the authority that we both carry as leaders, and the authority that is received by others. There's a very famous picture that's often used, the one on the left here on the slide, which is, people who are perhaps uh, might be less powerful, but they appear more powerful to others. But the opposite is equally true. And there's a lot here to be said about authority in general. But briefly, it's interesting to think about how is authority experienced by others. Before a leader says a word, people in the room are already responding to the role that they occupy. And a lot of that has to do with people's early childhood experiences with authority. Culture here plays a very big role in terms of how authority is experienced. People who come from an Arab culture might experience authority very differently from people who come from a Western or an Eastern culture. And so you as a leader might be thinking that you're projecting one kind of authority and unaware that it is being received by others very differently from how you think you're projecting it. Interesting to know, specifically, again, in high ambition and crisis situations, is that when the anxiety rises, when the stakes are high, people tend to relate to authority even more from a parental lens. So people who are normally quite happy to debate and push back and uh, kind of work with you as a leader to find a better solution suddenly find themselves looking to you for guidance, looking to you for approval. And so it's important as leaders to understand that in situations like this, when people start asking you for answers, for direction, if you jump too quickly to provide that, you might actually be increasing their anxiety rather than reducing it. And what's required in moments like this, again, this relational container, is how do I help people? How do I take the fear off of the shoulders of others in order for them to go back to being productive? So, containing the group has to do with taking responsibility for failure, which means if we fail as a team, I'm going to be responsible for this, not you. I want you to focus on what you can do. As a leader, relational containment is about slowing things down. A lot of it has to do with using yourself as an instrument. This is a bigger topic than can be discussed today, but very quickly, a powerful tool for leaders is to notice how they feel in the company of others. If they are feeling grounded and then suddenly feeling uh, like they lack confidence when they are with others, that feeling might have been projected into them by the group. And leaders can use that as a kind of clue to understand what others are feeling and to respond to that feeling in others rather than to try to fix a problem. And very important with relational containment, especially in meetings, for example, is to protect thinking time. Um, One thing that we see very much during periods of high ambition and periods of crisis is people tend to move very quickly through meetings. They tend to move very quickly towards taking action, um, ending meetings earlier than scheduled, which is great when you're working with complicated challenges. But if you're working with a complex challenge and you as a leader notice that we moved too quickly towards solutions. We didn't take enough time to really figure out what the problem is. It's your responsibility to protect thinking time, to say to the team, wait, there's more time. Let's sit with this a little longer and let's see whether we can discover something deeper about this problem that we can use. So those are just some quick glimpses into relational containment. We saw great examples again by UAE leadership of relational containment, being present with the public, being visible, and we saw the public's response after that of relief, of feeling safe, and that was an example of leadership kind of taking that fear off of the backs of the public. Moving to the third level is systemic containment. Um, and here it's useful to think of the role of the leader as a system designer. We tend to take system design for granted, whether it's building organization structures, decision-making processes, delegation of authority matrices, all the different things that make up an organizational system. We take these for granted, and we tend to believe that there's a best practice. But again, in periods of high ambition and complexity, it's important to design a system that delivers the outcomes that you require. So, for example, if you are prioritizing experimentation, think about how you reward work, how you reward achievement. Are you rewarding risk-taking or are you rewarding reliability? Do you have processes that require a lot of bureaucracy and approvals, or do you have a system that allows people to feel empowered and to act quickly? I've worked with many leaders who claim that they have a very creative team, that they are very innovative, but you look at their processes, you look at how they've built their systems, and those systems are actually designed around a lot of approval steps. Very quickly, I recognize that I'm a bit over time here. So think very carefully about how you design your system. Think very carefully about when is the right time to step in as a leader. And when you are stepping in, when the system is failing to deliver the outcomes that you wanted to deliver, are you stepping in to feel better yourself about what's happening, or are you stepping in to help the system? Because there are times where you want the system to stumble, to learn, and to grow. And so having that eye on what the mission is very important. Finally, the fourth layer is this idea of symbolic containment. When you think about the symbolism around what we're trying to do as an organization, as an entity, as a country, what's the culture we've built? What are the rituals and ceremonies that we have? What's the shared vocabulary? What are the myths that we tell from the past? The creation myth and how we came together, and what are the stories about the future? What's our hero's journey about what this is all about? This is something that was very powerful in Dubai. We all felt like we were on this shared mission to build something, this once in a lifetime opportunity to do something that resonated globally, and that really, drove achievement even in the darkest moments, even when things were very hard. So building some symbolism acts as a container, allows us to keep things going even when things get hard, for people to believe in a higher purpose. So those are the four layers of containment: inner, relational, systemic, symbolic. As a leader, you want to nurture containment at all four levels. I'm writing a book about containment. The book is almost ready to come out. If you are interested in receiving the first chapter when it's ready, and to be to find out when the book is ready to be published, scan this QR code, add your email to the mailing list, and I will let you know as soon as it's ready, and I will send you chapter 1. Thank you very much, Marilyn. Oops, I can't hear you again. We seem to be having audio problems today.
That's a me problem. I just left my mic on mute. I was just saying, I'm really looking forward to reading your book. and chapter 1 included. So I will definitely download the first chapter and give it a read. Wissam is having issues hearing me.
Now, I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. The first time it was just because I had forgotten myself, but now we have a bit of a problem.
There is a bit of a delay.
I'm going to mute you. I'm going to keep talking, and then we're going to give this a couple of seconds. So yeah, I mean, as Wissam has shared, we've spent a lot of time talking about containment and kind of seeing how it's exercised in practice. I'm going to wait until Wissam is able to hear me again. But fundamentally, I really, going back to that representation that Wissam showed earlier on, it's really about finding the space in between the kind of the flight or fight mode, where the level of pressure, whether that pressure is coming from a transformative project, a big ambition, a crisis, uncertainty, puts us in a place where we are unable to function, versus if we over contain, quote unquote, where we then start to experience things as if there was no pressure and then fail to
Marilyn, I
deliver
think
on that.
I can hear you a little better now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's a bit of a delay, but I think we'll make it work. Is there still an echo?
Yeah. Shall we give this a shot? There are a few questions from the audience that are here, and then I also have many questions. Can you confirm that you can now hear me well, Wissam?
I hear you well. There's the voice is off a little bit, but I think it should be okay.
We're going to be really patient with each other. So, Wissam, maybe my first question to you, of course, you've presented to us your thinking after decades of, as you said, watching this in action, and now, as you are an executive coach and have been for the last almost 10 years, seeing it in others. But I wonder if you can talk to us about your early career. I know you've been part of many transformations. I know you've been in situations with extremely ambitious projects and, with timelines collapsing, with pressure increasing. What has stayed most with you from the early experience where you experienced it as a member of the system, not just as someone maybe observing it with a bit of a distance?
Okay, so great question, Marilyn. One of the first things I had to work on when I joined the executive office was the redesign of Dubai government. So back then, Dubai government, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid had this big vision for government. And there was a recognition that government really had to be innovative and cutting edge in order for it to keep up with the big visions that Dubai had for its economy. And one of the earliest things that was put forward was this idea of e-government, for example. We take it for granted now that government entities have websites and you can apply for things online. But back then, only 20 years ago, really, in our lifetime, you had to get a stack of paper and go to government entities and apply for things and make sure you photocopied every paper 3 times and so on. And so there's this huge push for e-government. And then I joined soon after. And we were tasked with redesigning the entire Dubai government. We spent about 4 or 5 months doing that, a lot of benchmarking work, a lot of redesign work, interviews, research, analysis. We presented our new design to leadership, and they said the response was, your design is approved, you have 6 months to deliver it. And we thought we would need 5 years for every government entity, for each government entity, and we were given 6 months for everything. So that was the kind of environment we were in. You can imagine how much anxiety that created in the team. How do you deliver on a time frame that's significantly faster than what you had anticipated? But that was the scale of dreams and ambitions of Dubai at the time. And I remember in that meeting, we were speechless when we heard this. We weren't able even to gather the words to say, wait a second, are you sure about that? We thought we'd need more time, but leadership provided immediate containment in that moment. Don't worry, you have full support, you have all the resources that you need. We will not let you fail. And so that just made us feel like we could do the impossible.
I really love that. I've definitely been in those rooms where a deadline, was cut by, I don't know, 70 to 80% of what the expert evaluation was. And I have to say, I always say this about living here is, I used to work in tech before I moved to Dubai. And then when I moved here, I worked in real estate. I'm an architect by training. I always used to think that tech moved faster than buildings until I came here. And I was in many, many rooms where, in fact, the deadline would be cut by an insane amount. And at first, I resisted that because that's not the world I came from. I used to work in France before this. So, we plan everything first really, really well. But then, lo and behold, I discovered that things would get done in that insane amount of time somehow. Now that they were done and what impact they had is always a bit of a different question. Maybe tell us a little bit about what do leaders tend to underestimate about the pressure their teams are carrying, and how can we continue to be ambitious while still being aware of the impact that we are having on teams with regards to, again, some of it is in our control, like moving a crazy deadline. Some of it today is not in our control. And how can we become more aware of what the teams are carrying, and B, become more aware of our own impact on whether we are lightening, because you gave a beautiful example of, your leaders at the time saying, we got you, we're going to give you resources, we're not going to let you fail. So how do we realize whether we are lightening the load or the opposite?
Yeah, great question, Marilyn. The best leaders that I've worked with are the ones who are able to notice what the teams need to succeed. Our initial impulse always as leaders is to focus on the task. What do we need to do to get things done? But as leaders, that's not what's required of you. You have hired teams to do that for you. Your job is to help those teams succeed. So primarily leadership is about understanding the human dynamic that exists and understanding what you need to do with those teams in order to get them to perform at their best. And here, an understanding of how different people respond. I mentioned in my presentation at the beginning that understanding how authority is taken up, for example, how it's received by others is really important. But here, culture is an understanding of culture is equally important. For example, in the Arab world, we have a culture of high power distance, which means that we give a lot of respect to leaders. That's the great thing about high power distance, which means that decisions that we make are immediately implemented, but there's a shadow side to that. And the shadow side is people do not push back if we've made a bad decision. And so are we aware as leaders that we're only getting the positive picture, not the full picture? And are we creating enough spaces for people to disagree? And sometimes those spaces need to be in private to protect kind of the cultural context. We also live in an environment where there's high agreeability, a degree of compliance. Compliance is rewarded, and where failure sometimes can be socially expensive. We don't want to be seen as having failed. So how do you, as a leader, create some spaces where that's possible? So this sense of, to answer your question, Marilyn, the sense of what's the behavior that I want people um, to engage in order to succeed? How do I want them to step up as individuals? And through my understanding of the broader cultural environment and the organizational culture environment and how people perceive me as a leader, how can I create an environment where that kind of behavior is rewarded and encouraged? That's the kind of leadership that succeeds.
Thank you for that. I really love again, it goes back to your kind of in framework, but this idea that context matters, and the context is a combination of, myself as an individual, how I'm seen by the people around me, the culture of the organization, the culture of the place that we're in, or the cultures of where we come from, and being able to understand all of these layers together is an essential element. Going back to kind of these three states, let's say, and later I'm going to ask you about each of the four types of containment, but just how do you know when you're in that zone where containment is working versus when you're starting to touch the edges, whether they're the edge that's closer to like the fight or flight response, or the edge that's closer to the slow down chilling part? How can you detect that early?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the slowing down part, I would say, is easier to detect. People are just relaxed. They're not really paying attention to problems and challenges. Things are getting neglected. It's harder to detect the fight or flight one. And the way that you know whether people are within that productive zone or not is to look at where is the energy going. If the energy is going towards managing anxiety, for example, we need to design our reports in this way because otherwise our boss will be upset. Or we need to make sure that somebody was disappointed in something. Let's get 3 extra approvals this time before we go ahead. The more you see bureaucracy increasing, the more you see that productive energy is being wasted on, let's call it internal office politics, or on keeping the boss happy. That means we're in fight or flight mode. That means we're more concerned about managing internally rather than staying on mission and staying on task. And so what you want to see is people who are doing things that are directly related to your primary task. If you notice that people are spending more of their time keeping you happy as a leader, that means we've probably stepped into the fight or flight mode.
That's a really great way of making that distinction. I want to spend, the next 15 minutes or so just talking a little bit about each level, because I think, you took us through them conceptually. I'd love to maybe double click and make them feel practical for everyone. And we do have questions from the audience about some of them as well. So speaking of anxiety, you spoke about inner containment first. And you did give us some examples, but when you coach leaders, what are maybe one or two really practical things that you tell them to do in terms of being able to master what I'm sure is a layer that unlocks all the others, which is the inner containment piece?
Yeah, great question, Marilyn. And it really all starts with the inner container. You can't do a lot of work beyond that until you've worked on your own inner container. And the very first step is just building awareness. You and I have done a lot of work on the 3 reactive tendencies. Every leader has a certain type of behavior that they engage in when they are in reactive mode. Reactive mode means when we are leading from a place of anxiety or fear. We all have them. It's not a deficiency that we have them. We all start this way, and over time and with experience, the impact of those diminishes within us. But having an awareness of how do I behave when I'm reacting versus when I'm in a more creative state, and building that what's called a balcony lens. So as I am leading from the dance floor, there's a part of me that stays on the balcony and that observes how am I behaving and what am I doing, and am I moving back into reactive tendencies. So building that awareness. Another thing that's really important is all of our containers will overflow at some point. Who contains the container? If you're the ultimate container of your organization, do you have someone who contains you? That can be a trusted friend, that can be a peer, it can be a coach, it can be anyone where you can have conversations with them to make sense of what you're going through. So there's lots of practices, lots of tools that leaders can use, but it all starts with a very deep awareness of what makes us tick and where do we excel and where maybe we might have some areas that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I really resonate with this question of who contains you. I think we all end up finding, our own recipe, perhaps, of how we achieve our own containment. Some of it is personal. There's a comment from Cindy here around where she says, I sense that passion combined with value-based leadership and common purpose nurtures containment even when there is time pressure. Of course, we see this over and over again. The search for meaning, whether you call it a purpose, whether you call it values, whatever it is that can be your first principles, that's always a great place to regulate and to ground yourself and to contain yourself, because they remind you of what does and doesn't matter. But to your point, Wissam, I also, with a lot of the leaders I work with, or myself as well as a leader, I have people I go to for that. And they support me in finding that place. Alauddin asks a question, and I'm going to invite Alauddin to join us in perhaps one of our upcoming workshops, which is now on April 22nd. Maybe Wissam, you'll be able to join us. Originally it was on the 15th, but Alauddin asks, in high pressure moments and uncertainty where time feels limited, how can leaders stay grounded and contain what's happening while still maintaining pace and forward movement to deliver on ambition? I want to say this is the entire topic of our conference, so grounded and limitless. And we do have a workshop on the 22nd where we will actually explore together through our own personal experiences, but also through case studies, how leaders can do both stability and change. Grounded and limitless, whatever you want to call that polarity. And maybe Wissam, you'll be able to host it with us. I want to talk a little bit about relational containment. And I know we spoke about the impact of, the leader around them, but we have a question from Zainab here, which I think is really interesting, which is around how leadership teams can contain the pressure that they have amongst each other before it reaches the rest of the organization. And I would add to her question, like, while keeping a space for conflict and disagreement. So containment doesn't mean canceling tension. So talk to us about kind of this level, let's say, of relational containment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of containment is not something that happens by accident. That kind of containment at the leadership team level is something that you consciously design and practice, and you hold each other accountable for it. And it all starts at the top. In teams that are able to practice that kind of containment, they take the time to design the team dynamic. They take the time to think about, how do we want to work together? What does success look like when we come together as a team? What are the areas where we might face challenges, and how will we behave? And then they hold each other accountable to those standards. So those are the teams where there is space for people to say, we said we were going to do this and we haven't done this. How are we going to come back? And then there is also the grace and the non-judgment to accept that we all sometimes fall short of our standards, and that's okay. All we have to do is come back. A powerful practice I encourage all leadership teams to do, again, balcony moments. I do this with my clients when I'm doing team coaching with leadership teams. At the end of every conversation, whether it's a full day workshop or it's an hour-long, weekly catch up, have a balcony moment, 5 or 10 minutes at the end. How did we show up today? What are the things we noticed? What do we want to do differently next time? How are we going to support each other? So have a moment where you talk about the team dynamic and how you come together. And know that how you show up in that leadership team meeting is how your leaders individually are going to show up with the rest of their teams. There's no difference between how the leadership team behaves and how the organization as a whole behaves.
Yeah, that's a really great answer. And actually, tomorrow we'll be hosting a webinar with Roland Daher, who's the CEO of Astrolabs. We're going to talk a little bit about the work that we've done with him and his leadership team, and what you're describing is really what I would echo there. Obviously, work at the individual level, but at the collective level, how to raise that collective wisdom of the team, whether it's through the order piece, like really structuring the ways we make decisions, the way we come together, our cadence, creating space for that team, creating grace and connection and understanding, and also always taking a step back, looking at our team dynamics as, like the other object, the system outside of us, and continuously improving it. That's a lot of what we'll probably be talking about tomorrow, and how to build really, really strong leadership teams. On the systemic containment piece, we have a question from Razan, and I have a similar one, which is, so Razan's asking, like, what breaks containment at the systemic level? And I have the opposite question, which is, what enables system level containment that doesn't depend on a single individual?
Yeah, great question. Two things here I think are important to keep in mind. One is the system needs to evolve as the demands on the organization change. So if we are, for example, we're in a crisis situation right now, some organizations are facing challenges. That doesn't mean that the way that we work together stays the same. Sometimes we need to move to a different way of working. Sometimes we have to allow things that are different. Very simply, if you think about an organization where usually the vast majority of things are process driven, they're predictable. So for example, if you are booking a ticket with Emirates Airlines, it's predictable. There's steps you follow. At the end of those steps, you have a booking. A lot of the organization tends to run based on these kind of processes. Parts of the organization, hopefully, if you are an organization that's evolving and growing, are more experimental, so innovation driven. So we're going to try new things. We're going to try new ways of engaging with our customers, of doing things differently. In moments of crisis or high ambition, you want more of the organization to be experimental. So very simply, if you think about the systems that you've designed to run this organization, how can you create more space for experimentation and risk taking, whether that means updating your HR competency matrix, whether that means updating your approval processes, whether that means changing your organization structure, creating more units that are experimentation labs or innovation labs or things like this. That's one element of it. There's another element which I think is interesting, which is that organizations naturally drift over time from a focus on primary task to a focus on primary risk. What you tend to find is the older an organization gets, the more bureaucracy gets created within the organization. And the reason that happens is every once in a while somebody makes a mistake, and then 20 new processes are added to avoid that mistake in the future. And so fast forward 10 or 20 years, you end up with this huge bureaucracy. So there's a need every once in a while to just go in and clean things up. Whenever you notice more and more of our productivity, of our energy is being spent on avoiding mistakes, then every once in a while just go in and push the focus back on primary task rather than avoiding risk. I think those two things are useful to keep the system design focused on what we're really trying to achieve rather than avoiding mistakes of the past that may no longer be relevant.
Yeah, I really love this, like a system reboot kind of thing. I saw it, this year. I remember seeing an initiative from the Dubai government, which was called something like "No Bureaucracy" or something, and they were systematically going back and reviewing existing processes and killing essentially some of these processes that just really didn't add value, but serve to protect from risk rather than enable the system. I think that's really, really fun. And I also think, the cyclical nature, we do need a good cleanup every once in a while. I learned how to do that the hard way in a place like Dubai, because Dubai has a really strong immune system. So whether in crisis or not, companies here tend to clean up every once in a while by default, but I really saw the value of that, honestly. Even though it wasn't, it's not always easy to manage it in a way that feels humane. Sometimes it is a bit violent for the people experiencing it. As a leader, though, I'm like, yep, I get it. Makes sense. There was a lot of things going on here that just weren't serving the end goal. And I think a lot of companies, like you said, do struggle. And in fact, my keynote next week is going to be about this, because I think what we struggle with is we all say like, oh, we should stay agile, we should create space for experimentation, we should allow people to fail, and so on and so forth. But actually, there's not a lot of clear, here are 5 examples of exactly how companies have done that. So I'm hoping to bring a bit of that context next week in my keynote. One last question on symbolic containment. It's all the time we'll have, but and then we'll do our lightning round. With the symbolic containment piece, of course, like symbolic management is a thing, right? And we talk about it, we learn about it. But in your mind, how do you make sure that your narrative is credible in times like these, the symbolic element of it, rather than sounding like empty reassurance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure there's a kind of a 3-minute answer, but one thing I will say is it's always, whenever I'm coaching leaders, I always find it to be a powerful exercise to gain perspective. And what I mean by this is step away from the current short-term crisis. What's the bigger story here? People who've been through multiple crises do this naturally. They immediately say, this is another one of those, and we're going to get through it. But what's the bigger mission? What's the bigger story? What are we trying to do here that's beyond kind of the day-to-day operations or selling or growth or whatever it is that we're doing? What's the mission beyond that? What do we stand for? People need to believe in something bigger than themselves, and that takes a lot of soul searching on the part of the leader as well. Because as you said, if it's something shallow and empty, people will pick up on that. They'll know it's not true. So leaders have to reflect on why do they do what it is that they do. There's a powerful concept in psychology called the wounded healer, which is we often bring to the world that thing that we find is missing in ourselves. And so it's interesting to think about the more that we become self-aware and the more that we think about our lens on the world, the closer we get to an articulation of that bigger, what that bigger purpose is. I'll give you a very simple example. People are often surprised that the funniest people in the world are the ones that feel inside often the most sad. And that's normal because they bring to others what is missing in themselves. And I believe that's true also at an organization level. So what brought you, what attracted you to this role, to your mission, to the work that you do, is often that very thing that you find you need more of in yourself. And I think that's a useful starting point to think about what's our bigger purpose, what's our mission, and how do we tap into that when we think about the organizational narrative.
Thank you so much for that. I love the concept of the wounded healer, not least of all because Chiron, who is a famous centaur, is known as being the wounded healer. So it's in our mythology. Wissam, there are more questions from the audience, but sadly we don't have time to go over them. I do need, however, for us to go through our 4 lightning round questions, which are questions that we ask all of our speakers. Thank you already for everything you've given us. Just a last few, questions to extract final wisdom from you. Wissam, you yourself, what keeps you grounded?
What keeps me grounded are moments that I create for reflection are very important. I have a few friends that keep me very grounded. You are one of them, Marilyn. Every once in a while, I know I've lost my grounding and I reach out to those people who care enough and are trustworthy enough to tell it to me like it is, but they do so with grace and with patience, and they allow me to take the time to find my truth again. And sometimes what keeps me grounded is just stepping away from the noise of it all for a while until I find my center again. That can be difficult in our highly connected world today, but I think it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy to be one of those people, Wissam. I always tell my friends, if you want tough love, you know who to call. Okay, question number 2. What is helping you to stay limitless, to keep possibility and imagination and curiosity alive at this moment?
Intention, really. And I don't mean this lightly. I noticed last year that I wasn't taking enough risk. And I made the intention that 2026 was going to be the year of risk taking, to step into places that I hadn't been before, to do things that I hadn't done before. I think it's really important to do this intentionally and then to hold yourself accountable about whether you are genuinely trying to be limitless or not. Because even though we make that intention, often we fall back onto comfortable patterns. And so deciding what it means to be limitless and then noticing when you're not doing that, I think is interesting.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that. And I use a word of the year. I always find that the more constraint you give yourself, the more limitless you can become, actually. So just as you've done, like setting a very clear intention and then making sure that you stick by it can sometimes lead you to be really limitless. So I really love that. I had a professor who used to say, discipline will set you free. So I'm resonating. What is a leadership quality from the Arab world that has come to life in times of uncertainty or even in times of high ambition that the rest of the world can learn from?
Okay, so I mean, the title of this session is Containment. So that's the leadership quality I want to highlight. Maybe if I wanted to offer you something new other than containment, one thing that we heard time and again from His Excellency Mohammed Al-Girgawi, the Minister of Cabinet Affairs, who led the Prime Minister's office, because the PMO was under the Ministry of Cabinet Affairs, is in moments of intensity, in moments of tight deadlines and big deliverables, he would always say, the more in a hurry you are, um, the more you need to walk slowly. So this idea of the faster you need to go, the slower you need to go in order to move fast has stayed with me, and I find it to be a very powerful way of staying on top of things.
It's a really good one. And then lastly, Wissam, based on everything that we've spoken about today and the book that you're writing, what are the top 3 things that you would advise leaders to do right now?
3 things. Build more self-awareness if you haven't already. Do whatever it takes to see yourself more clearly. That's one thing. 2, engage with people, with your teams, with your stakeholders, with your clients. Don't engage with them as in the way that you've been used to. Engage with them as people. A lot of people have come to me asking, how do I deal with the crisis? How do I keep my business afloat? How do I build more business? Talk to people, ask about them, find out what's happening in their lives. We want that human connection, I think is super important. Third thing, what should people do? Let's leave it perhaps at 2 for today.
Sounds good. I don't see why not. Thank you so much, Wissam, again, for being here, for giving us the scoop as well.
Great. Thank you for having me, Marilyn. This is great. And I love being on this show with you. I love these conversations. We always find something interesting to talk about, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, likewise. It is definitely not the last and not the first and not the last. So we will continue to have them. Maybe Wissam, you and I should have a show together. Who knows? To everyone who tuned in, thank you for being here, for your questions, for your attention, for learning with us. We really appreciate you being a part of it. If you ever want to come back to this content, it's going to be on our website, our YouTube, and our podcast called Center Stage. If someone from your network could benefit from it, please do pass it along. Once more, we beg you, we think we have so much to teach the rest of the world. Wissam has given us a couple of qualities that leaders from this region can share with the rest of the world. We think there are many more, and we want your perspective. We are going to drop a link to our survey on leading in the Arab world. It really literally only takes 4 minutes to fill out, and it'll allow us to publish research that we hope the rest of the world can learn from. We are continuing the conversations over the coming weeks. Today was part of week 2, Adapt, where we focus on how organizations can institutionalize creativity, sense emerging shifts, and adapt to them. And tomorrow, as I mentioned earlier, at 4 p.m. on April 9, we're hosting Roland Daher, who's the CEO of Astrolabs, where we're going to be talking about how to build both trust and tension, how leadership teams do their best work, where we will cover actually the systemic level, the team level, as well as the self. So we look forward to having you with us tomorrow. Thank you again for being here, and we hope to see you soon.